Top 5 Best Macro Lenses for Nikon. Number 5. Nikon 200mm f4D Micro. Let's start with the good. This lens is unbelievably sharp. It's sharp at f4, both in the center and the corners, and it stays sharp as you stop down. It also offers incredible bokeh. And for insect photographers, the Nikon 200mm Micro is a dream come true. The working distance, even at life size, 1x magnifications, is an impressive 10.2 inches. You can capture beautiful, detailed photos of bugs without scaring them off. This lens is also built like a tank. If you're the type of photographer who lets your equipment take a beating, don't worry. Unfortunately, the metal body comes with a downside, the hefty weight. The Nikon 200mm Micro is just over 2.5 pounds. This makes hand-holding in the field quite tough. Add to that the lack of VR, and you're looking at a lens that requires a tripod in low light, or some very steady hands. Plus, autofocusing is rather slow. If you like to focus manually, this isn't an issue. But you'll struggle to track insects as they move about, so if you're looking for the fastest possible AF, I'd recommend going with the Sigma 180mm, above, instead. Ultimately, the Nikon 200mm f4 Micro is a great lens, and it offers spectacular image quality. But it's big, it's heavy, it's pricey, and autofocus isn't especially strong, so unless you're an insect photographer who requires exceptional sharpness, I'd recommend another option. Coming in number 4. Nikon 60mm f2.8G Micro-Nikkor. The Nikon 60mm f2.8G is one of the only shorter macro lenses on this list, primarily due to usability. 60mm just isn't a great focal length for macro photography. At such a short focal length, you'll have to get extremely close to your subject if you want sharp images, so you risk casting shadows or knocking your subject. Which begs the question, who is a lens like this for? I recommend short macro lenses to photographers who want a walk-around lens, but also want to be able to shoot up close. Because here's the thing. 60mm is going to be too short for insects. And while 60mm can work for close-up flower photography, you have the distance problems I mentioned above, plus the bokeh at such a short focal length just isn't as impressive as bokeh at, say, 105mm. However, if you're in the market for a walk-around macro lens, then the Nikon 60mm has a lot going for it. First, it's light. Really, really light. At just under 1 pound, the Nikon 60mm lens won't be difficult to handhold even in low light. Nor will it be a pain to carry around. It's also extremely sharp. And despite the 60mm focal length, bokeh is decent. I still prefer the background blur on the longer focal length lenses, but this lens is far from bad. The Nikon 60mm Micro does lack image stabilization, which is disappointing, given how frequently it comes in handy at high magnifications. But the short focal length means that you can still handhold this lens, even at low shutter speeds. Finally, build quality is good, but not great. This lens feels solid, but it's far from tank-like. Bottom line. If you want a walk-around lens that can also shoot some great macros, the Nikon 60mm is certainly an option worth considering. Coming in number 3. Nikon 105mm f2.8G Micro-Nikkor VR. The Nikon 105mm f2.8G Micro VR is a great macro lens, but one that comes with a significant price tag. It'll get you crystal clear images across the board, starting from its wide-open aperture of f2.8. Plus, it captures beautifully rendered, contrasty images. Not to mention the bokeh, which is smooth and creamy, like chocolate. What else? This lens comes with vibration reduction, promising an extra 4 stops of shooting in low light. For macro photographers who like to shoot handheld, this is essential. Most macro lenses are borderline useless in low light unless they include VR. It's a true macro lens, which means that it offers life-size magnification. And while I do almost all my macro shooting handheld, I love that the autofocus speed is extremely fast. A couple of final points. The build quality is impressive. This lens will last a long time. The Nikon 105mm VR offers internal focusing, so you won't have to deal with an extending front lens element. When you're working at high magnifications, this is a real benefit. For any serious macro shooters looking to do flower photography, the Nikon 105mm Micro is a great option, assuming you're willing to pay. By the way, if you want to keep improving your macro photography, then I have something you're going to love. My free macro photography cheat sheet, designed specifically to help you capture stunning photos, consistently. It's thousands of hours of experience, all condensed into one short document. Coming in number 2. Nikon 40mm f2.8G Micro. If you're looking to just get started with macro photography and you don't want to spend the extra $150 or so for the Sigma, then I wholeheartedly recommend the Nikon 40mm f2.8. It offers 1:1 true macro magnification, which means that you'll be able to get that ultra close-up perspective that macro photographers love. And the manual focus ring offers just the right amount of stiffness for precision focusing. Plus, the optics are stellar. The 40mm f2.8 Micro is crystal clear wide open, and stays that way all the way through the aperture range, until diffraction sets in. If you're looking for gorgeous detail shots of leaves, flowers, snow, and more, then the 40mm Micro is an excellent choice. And while you don't get image stabilization, the lens is relatively small and light, which means that you don't have to worry as much about camera shake. Plus, it makes it the most travel-ready lens out of all the options on this list. Unfortunately, a lens that's this cheap is going to come with at least one or two downsides, and here they are. First, this is a DX lens, which means that you can't use it on a full-frame camera. Assuming you're shooting with any one of Nikon's excellent APS-C cameras, such as the Nikon D3500 series, the Nikon D5600 series, or the Nikon D7500 series, you'll be just fine. But if you use a full-frame camera, or you plan to go full-frame in the near future, just be aware that this lens will no longer be useful. And second, this lens is only 40mm long, a 60mm focal length equivalent on APS-C cameras. This is an issue for two reasons. First, it means that your working distance is tiny. In other words, if you're shooting at high magnifications, the front of the lens will get very close to your subject, and while this isn't always an issue, you may find yourself casting shadows on the subject, or even bumping into it with your lens. And second, the smaller the focal length, the less background compression that the lens offers, and, consequently, the less interesting the bokeh. It's not a deal breaker, but longer macro lenses, for example, the Sigma 105mm, are just going to offer more smooth, creamy backgrounds compared to a 40mm lens like this. That said, the 40mm focal length can double as a standard prime, which means that you can use it for walk-around photography, street photography, portrait photography, and the like. So if you decide macro isn't your thing, you won't have to worry about having a pointless lens at the bottom of your camera bag. Anyways, the 40mm f2.8 is a great lens, one that packs stellar optics and nice ergonomics in a small package. If you're just looking to test out the macro waters, then it's a great way to get some stunning close-up shots. Coming in number 1. Sigma 105mm f2.8 OS Macro. These days, you can find dozens of macro lenses for Nikon. But one rises above the rest. The Sigma 105mm OS HSM Macro. It offers an incredible combination of a reasonable price, true, 1:1, macro magnification, tack-sharp optics, excellent build quality, and even some optical stabilization for the added benefit of crisp shots at high magnifications. The focal length is smack dab in the middle of what most macro photographers need at 105mm. You're going to get enough working distance to shoot details and flowers, without so much length that you feel like you're carrying around a barbell. Regarding optics, the Sigma 105mm macro is sharp across the board. Images look great starting out at f2.8, then become even sharper when stopping down to f4 and f5.6. Chromatic aberration is minimal, and what does exist is easily correctable in a program such as Lightroom or Luminar. Build quality is nice, without resulting in a lens that's like a tank. I'm also a fan of the big focus ring design. If you're not frequently using the manual focus on your macro lens, then you're probably doing it wrong, which is where a thick rubber ring becomes very useful. The big bonus here is the image stabilization. While this may not seem like a big deal after all, plenty of macro lenses don't offer stabilization. It's important to remember that high magnifications magnify camera shake while reducing light. That's where image stabilization becomes a huge benefit, so that you can drop your shutter speed down to the 1/60th to 1/80th range without sacrificing sharpness. Honestly, what's great about the Sigma 105mm macro is that you can grab it for cheap, but you'll never have to upgrade. It's the sort of lens that's great for beginners and more serious photographers alike.